we're kind of in the part 2 of this topic. We've covered some, which we'll do a quick review in a few minutes. And today we're going to continue on and hopefully wrap up and have a basic understanding of how we can work with theme.json and implement it into our themes, whether block themes or just in general. So let's see. All right. So as people are coming in, I would love to know what is a fun WordPress fact that you know, and I can kick it off. Feel free to either answer with your voice or in the chat. And I'm curious to see if anyone knows something about WordPress that I don't know. For me, it's two parts. One is when I started using WordPress, it was way back in, I'm pretty sure 2007. And at that time, there were two things that were not really built into WordPress itself. One was if you wanted to use widgets, it was a plugin. There were no widgets at that point. And also there was no theme directory. Official theme directory wasn't a thing. And what happened was all of these little side sites popped up where you could download WordPress themes, and a lot of times things that you downloaded from those sites were maybe not all above board. So WordPress has come a long way in coming up on 20 years. So anyone have a fun WordPress fact? It doesn't have to be a secret. It doesn't have to be ancient history. Even just something that you think is fun about WordPress will do. Okay, well, let's see. Opening the world to creativity. Yeah, I think WordPress does that. And more over time. And the idea of it being open and not a proprietary commercial product is pretty awesome. I love that it's created by volunteers, maintained by volunteers, and that anyone can make a contribution to the project that built 40% of the web, for over 40 now. Let's see. The ability to block comments if they contain certain words. That's pretty handy. It's nice to be able to have some control over what gets through to your comment section. Alex says, reading The Year Without Pants by Scott Birkin. It's Birkin, not Berkeley. About the beginning of WordPress. It's fascinating. Yeah, that book is about time that Scott spent working at Automatic, where I work, and it's a good read. It's mostly about distributed work, but there is quite a bit of WordPress stuff in there. Yeah, censoring comments. So if you go into the settings, the discussion settings for your WordPress site, there are a number of options to whitelist and blacklist and decide what your moderation options should be and things like that. So it's pretty cool. Open source is incredible. Yes, I love it. We don't even realize, I think, how much open source we all touch on a daily basis, built into our operating systems and running software that maybe we paid for. Part of components of it. It's pretty amazing, and it's amazing if something if somebody stops maintaining something that's been used in a lot of places. It's amazing the trickle down effect that can have. So interesting reading if you're ever curious.
Come on, Cindy, get your shit together.
So if I hear much background noise, I may mute everyone, but feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself. And I am just gonna, now Sarah's here, she's gonna help me out with the chat, and that will help us get moving forward. Let's see. Okay. All right, we've got a pretty good sized group here. Looks like about 35 people now. That's pretty great. Let's see. I'm just going to go through the rest of these answers and then we can go ahead and move forward with our content for today. Changing users, no more guest books anymore was once a main feature. So changing uses. I'm not quite sure I'm following that, but great community. Yes, WordPress does have a really great community. A lot of good things about WordPress, but not usually thinking of them as fun. Well, I think they're all fun. So I think WordPress is fun. There's some discussion of the big corporations contributing money to open source. Yeah, I think that the future of open source really depends on contributors being able to make a living somehow, whatever that looks like. So super important. So, all right. Okay. So I guess I don't know how guest books played into WordPress, but I'd be curious to look into that. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to actually, let me back up. My screen's probably going to go crazy for a bit while I reorganize myself here. I want to start with this housekeeping. Okay, so we are going to record this. We'll be sharing this via YouTube, and also we've been discussing maybe uploading this series to WordPress.tv, which is just a WordPress specific video site. If you're concerned about your video being in the recording, feel free to turn off video sharing. The space is safe for discussion, so I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, what you already know, maybe something that I missed or wasn't 100% accurate. I am always learning every day, and would love to know if I get something maybe not right or with not the nuance that it needs. And then if you know an answer, feel free to answer. So, all right. So this is last time's overview, and we're basically still in this. So we looked over the JSON file format, talked a little bit about how it's structured. The chat is recorded. If anyone would like I'm looking at the chat box. Sorry for the interruption there. The chat is saved, so if anybody would like it, I can certainly share it out to individuals, or I don't know. That's probably the easiest thing to do. Let's see. I do try to read out the questions that I'm answering. So if I don't do that, I'll try to make sure that I do that way, that the chat is not necessarily required. And as Sarah said, you can also save the chat yourself with the there's in the chat box, there's an options menu, and you can click save chat there, and it'll save it to your own computer. Okay, so we're got down to an overview of the top level sections of theme.json and what they do. So I think we covered that last week, where we have version, schema, version, setting, styles, and then there are two more that we're not really going to be covering in this course too much, which are custom templates and template parts. Let's see. So we're going to go into a little bit more exploration of the style section this week. So last time we talked about supports and presets that allow us to enable and disable design controls for blocks, and also to create presets for things that might have an option to select from a list of things like colors or font families, that sort of thing. So we're going to start today by talking a little bit of a detour to talk about CSS custom properties. I don't think we really got into that last time. So we'll go ahead and start there, and then we'll take a look at styles. So let me get back to the right place in my slideshow here. Some of my slides I'm going to be kind of creating on the fly. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so, all right, we're going to start here, and I'm not going to present. I'm just going to leave it like this so that I can type into the screen. So CSS custom properties are a native feature of CSS. They are not anything that you need any special tooling to use. All modern browsers support it. Internet Explorer is not a modern browser, and I think that's the only one that would still maybe be in use on a somewhat regular basis, but even Microsoft doesn't support it anymore. So they're trying really hard to get people to update everything that they can do, they do. So to move into the newer browsers, even from Microsoft. So the places where you might still see it used would be in very slow to upgrade corporate settings. But over time, eventually things have to change. So, so because modern browsers support it, we have started to implement it into WordPress. And the idea is that you can create variables, declare them, like define a variable with a name that can be used in all different places of your styling for your site. They work just fine in your CSS, and they also are used by the block editor to style the blocks, both on the back end and on the front end. So let's look at what that looks like. So here I have created a slide, and on the left side, we have our theme.json. This is very simple, oversimplified. What it does, the only thing that this particular theme.json do would be to create this top section that I have on the right. This is what's going to actually go into the output of the website. So we've created these two preset colors. So, and we've given them a name, and these double dashes are called kebab casing. And this is just basically how the naming convention works for what we build in the block editor. Make the font larger. Let me try to make the font larger. Let's see what I can do here. It's just making it smaller. That's no good. See just how big it'll let me go. I think that's all I can get. Is that better? Okay. So we have our body. We're adding these variables. So we gave them a name, which is on the left side of this colon, and we gave them a value, which is on the right side. So we're saying our WP preset color black is 0000000, which is of course the color black in hexadecimal. And then we've done the same thing for white. So you can see that we named our black over here on the left and the white, and then this is what actually shows up on the front end. And in the body, we could use these by just using regular CSS. So I have my body is the selector, and then I'm going to say the background, I want to use this color black. And the way that we call it in the CSS is by saying, oh, we're going to use a variable, and here's its name. So we already created that variable, and now we're going to utilize it by starting with BAR, parentheses, and then you close the parentheses after it. And that's really all there is to the most basic usage of CSS custom properties. Sometimes you'll hear them as CSS variables or CSS custom variables. All right. So yes. I'm sorry? Okay. So Sarah asks, instead of black or white, could I name them helpful things like background, foreground, or highlight? Yes. You can name them what you want in the theme JSON. So in this example, it's black and white, but you could say dark color or light color, or maybe where it's going to be used on your site. And by naming it things that are describe the usage rather than describing the color, it makes your future theming a little bit better, in my opinion. Semantic naming is a pretty big thing in web development in general, and that holds true for CSS as well. So if you were to look at the theme JSON file for the 2022 theme, you would see that the colors are all named based on how they're used. So you have foreground and background and some other colors, naming conventions like that. And that means that in the future, you could say, well, I want my foreground to now be this color, and you could change it and it would apply across everywhere and keep the same name. And Sally mentions there are some guidelines somewhere about a preference for primary, secondary, etc. So it doesn't matter what the color actually is. Helpful when a company decides to change branding. Yeah, that's a big use case, I think, is that when a company decides to change branding, often they want that change to happen very quickly on a date for legal reasons, and just being able to update a few values in the theme JSON would make that process potentially a lot less painful for an organization that's doing that process. A lot of times they might actually go through and do a whole web redesign at the same time and try to roll it out together, but that comes with its own own challenges. So any questions about CSS custom properties right now? One thing I didn't mention, feel free to call out your questions, but one thing I don't think I mentioned was this naming convention of the variable, the dash dash WP dash dash preset dash dash color dash dash black. That's created by WordPress based on what's in theme JSON. So it starts with WP for WordPress, and then it says, oh, this is a preset. And the preset is of the color section, and then the name of the color is this. So, and you'll see similar naming in other parts of the style or the theme JSON as well. So, and we are on version 2. I actually just moments before this chat, I copied this right out of the docs that have not been updated to version 2, but we are indeed on theme JSON version 2. So that should be 2. Is this in a child theme is the next question. It could be in a child theme. A theme JSON can be placed into a child theme, and anything that's in the theme JSON will first pull from the child theme, and then it'll look for that section in the parent theme's theme JSON. And Alex says, so it could be a WP preset border. I don't know if that's exactly what I think that sounds right. So we can go look at the, we can look at that in a minute to see what the other names might be. Right, so let's go ahead and go forward. And now basically I have a blank screen, and I'm going to try to create this as we go. We'll see how well it works. So basically, when you are working with settings and presets, those are in the settings section of theme JSON, you have supports, which are going to basically determine whether or not different design controls are available in the user interface. Like, do you want to allow people to select a custom color with a picker? Yes or no? It's defaulted to yes, but you can say no, and then that custom color picker would go away. You can also limit it so that they can only select from a predefined palette of colors. You can decide whether or not you want the core default colors to display. There are a whole bunch of things doing that. So can you override, there's a question, can you override theme JSON using style.css? You can. What theme.json is actually doing is not, it is generating CSS, but it's mostly about creating defaults for your blocks. So where do they start when you first initially add a block to your site? What's it going to look like? So the next question I see is custom properties only require that dash dash at the beginning. That is true. Theme.json uses the dash dash through the whole naming convention. So it's generating that for you. And if you're relying on the block editor to create your styling or the visual look of that block, then all of this is going to happen without your intervention. So, but you can use these variables that WordPress is generating based on your theme JSON in your style.css or other style sheets, however your theme is set up. Okay. So a lot of this is really about letting WordPress do some of the heavy lifting for you. So, so we talked about style settings, and which are the presets, and then the supports. So the presets are going to basically help define the options that are available. So we talked about colors. Let's see, I've got a list over here somewhere that lists the things that can be preset. This might not be a complete list, but duotone can have options predefined. Gradients can have options predefined. Your color palette, often your color palette will then be used in your gradient and your duotone presets. So you even within the settings section, you might be using some of these variables. And that could look, let's see an example of what that might look like. So this is just a portion, but it'll kind of give you an idea. Hopefully this doesn't take up too much space. All right, so I'm just going to remove a little bit of this to make it a bit better. Okay, so we have our, actually this is a terrible example. It's not actually doing that. We could, instead of calling in the actual hex code in the color for this duotone, we could actually call in the variable that's created in the color palette instead. So, and we would just do it like, it would be like, let's see if I can remember it. It would be something like bar -wp preset and if I were in my IDE right now, I could be using the schema to help me remember what what these are, but it would be strong dash magenta. And this is actually helpful because you can see that there's only one dash here because the dash is actually part of the slug where it was defined. So that's how you could potentially use one of these variables right within your settings, which is kind of handy because then you still are only declaring that color in one place. So if I wanted strong magenta to have a different hexadecimal code, I could just change it right here in the theme JSON. All right, any questions about that so far? I feel like we're getting a little deep in the code at this point, which might be familiar for some people and not so much for others. I did see a question. If you have conflicting code between theme.json and the CSS, which wins? I think your CSS is going to load after your theme.json in most cases. So I would think that your CSS is going to win over theme.json. So it's kind of like what order it shows up in this. And there's if you look up cascading of CSS, you can learn some of the complexity of how that works, because it'll use what's furthest in and then work its way backwards, basically. Yeah, Doug, so you asked why theme.json would place double dashes throughout. It's not a usual way to use CSS properties. I think there is something about that somewhere in the docs. I've read it, but I'm not seeing it on the page that I'm looking at right now. So in the developer handbook, it does, oh no, it's under frequently asked questions. So one thing you may have noticed is the naming schema used for the CSS custom properties the system creates, including the use of double hyphen to separate different concepts. So if you think presets such as WP preset color black are divided into chunks. So the idea is those double hyphens are dividing into the sections that it's kind of like lining it up with what it is in theme.json effectively. And I don't know for sure why it was decided to do it that way, but that's what they've done. So let's see. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into styles now. So the styles section of theme.json can be somewhat of a misnomer. It took me a while to like wrap my head around why it was called styles and is it really doing the styling? And it does add CSS to the site, but primarily its purpose is to set the defaults for your blocks. So when you create a block and you haven't applied any custom settings to it, how is it going to look right out of the box? And that's what the style section is going to help determine. So we can do things like set our background color or set the text color, or let's see if I have some other examples. The fonts that are used. So here we have, this is again, copying right out of the docs. Okay, so this is styles. So we have these sections, we have typography, we have elements, we would have some others like color. There is a list of the possible options. Border, color, spacing, typography, elements, and blocks. So within each of these, we are going to basically say, I have my style. I want to set a default for the typography styles. And what I want to put into typography here is a font size. So the font size is actually going to take the naming that you would have in your CSS and basically convert it over to the way it is in JavaScript. So we're, instead of a font dash size, we're saying font with a lowercase f and an uppercase s. That's typical JavaScript naming conventions. So we've basically said variable is WP preset font size, and the font size is normal. Now, this indicates that we set, when we created our size presets up in the settings section, we would have called one normal. And down, and we're saying that the first thing is I want all of my font to start off normal. And now we can go in and override it for other use cases. For example, we have our H1 under elements. The elements section of styles applies to H1 through H6 and links. So those are the options that we have. So we have elements, and then we drill into H1, and now we call in typography again. And in typography, we're going to set the font size to the one named huge. And H2 is big, and H3 is medium. And then I think if I can get rid of some of this, then we can go down and we can see if it adds anything else. Yeah, then we start going into specific blocks. So if I get rid of all the elements section to bring up the block section, you can see that now we did typography, and then we did general elements, like anywhere you have an H1, I want it to be giant. But now we can say, okay, I want the group block. So we have blocks, and then we're going to call in a specific group. And the naming convention for this is core/group. And then we're going to start again from that next level up and say for elements in here, if it's a group block and I want my H2 to have a font size of small. So if you know that you're going to have styling that's different based on the block that it's in, this is the way to do that. So you can get very specific with these default styles. All right. So how would you add Google fonts into theme.json? So you can name them in the theme.json file. Let me get an example of what that looks like. So you would add them to the presets area in the settings, and it would look something like this. Ooh, that's good. I copied too much, just a second. Okay, so this would be in the settings section. You can use typography and then font families under typography. And then you'd say that the font family is, and then you would load your font stack here, just the same way that you would in your CSS. And it's assuming that these are either system fonts or already in queued fonts if you're using custom fonts. So there are some Google fonts in here. The idea would be, as came up in the chat, that you would want to download those fonts and locally store them in your theme somewhere, and then pull them in from that location rather than reaching out to a third-party server to pull them in. So it was very common, especially for Google fonts, as people started to explore the possibilities of including really interesting fonts on their websites, to use these hosted services. But because of the way that GDPR has changed the landscape for us as web developers, it's much better to control that source so that you're not concerned about what kinds of cookies are being collected on your visitors. But you do have to actually, if it's not a system font like this Roboto or Oxygen Sans, I think both of those are probably custom fonts. You would need to get that source code, store it someplace on your web server, probably in a fonts directory in your theme. And then you would use functions.php to enqueue those scripts, just like you always would have in any other theme. So I would suggest looking in the theme developers handbook on developer.wordpress.org to see if there are some resources for that. Let's see. So settings tells me what things I can turn on and off and on, and lets me set which colors I want to use in this next section, which colors you want to have available in the next section. So in settings, you would say, I'm going to create a list of available colors or available font families. And then you can actually assign them to things by default, 2 different blocks in the styles section. Let's see. Yeah, so there's a comment about using enqueuing the style.css and then setting up the font family in theme.json. Yeah, okay, so Roboto and Oxygen Sans may be system fonts on Android phones. So this could very well be a system stack that's basically covering all of the different system fonts that are available on common browsers. I know that I've gotten Roboto from Google, so that was probably an assumption on my part. So,
Well,
all right.
it's a Google font on your computer.
Computer.
But if you have an Android phone owned by Google
fonts.
It's already in there.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes complete sense. Sure. All right. So let's see. I would love to try to clear up anything I've made confusing so far. So I know that there is a lot happening here, and it's kind of being put out here in pieces. So what we could do is move over to a complete file and kind of walk through it. That might help demystify some of it. But I see, shouldn't the Helvetica new font in the font family be wrapped? So it is here, but it is not down here. I think, yes, best practice would be to wrap it. Whether or not this would work written this way, I'm not really sure. This is not from a working file, it's from the documentation. So your mileage may vary. I would say that anytime you have multiple words in a font name, you probably want to wrap it. And the wrapping is like that, where you have an escape, the double quotes, escape and double quotes at the end. Yeah, I think because of the JSON format, because the JSON formatting uses the double quotes to identify the name and value, you do have to escape any double quotes that you use within one of those names or values in order for it to work correctly. That's pretty common for using important characters within something in any coding. So loading too many fonts slows down a site and can confuse people with certain disabilities who need more cognitive consistency. That is true. I think that a lot of where possible, system fonts are a good way to go. Where you might find loaded fonts or custom fonts to be helpful is for Flourish, or like to be used sparingly though. And so if you don't have to load a font in order to display your website, it will improve your load times because you're relying what's already on the website or already on the visitor's computer. So, but yeah, branding is a big reason that people use fonts. And I think that style guides often will have specific fonts that are declared as being needed to be used. So hopefully that's kind of one of those grassroots kind of movements where don't tell me what my body text font should be. So Yeah, I would be curious to learn a little bit more. There's Yi says we may have to install another font for other languages. I don't know. I don't know what the use case would, I can't think of a use case for that, but characters, obviously you would need different fonts if you have non-English characters, especially. Oprah has her own branded font family. I think a lot of corporate fonts are created, like large companies will create and copyright the fonts that are made for them. So yeah, Chinese or Japanese fonts would be very different from English fonts. Okay, so let's see if we can take a closer look at a theme.json file. Give me just a second to get something open here. And we have about 18 minutes left to the top of the hour. So I think what I'll do is we can just look at this file and then wrap things up for today. All right. Let's see here. Okay, so what's up on the screen? I'm going to make this text a lot bigger. Okay. So what's up on the screen now is the theme JSON from the 2022 theme. And you can see on our first line, we've got our schema that's going to help typing things in a lot easier. It's kind of cool because if you're curious about any of what this does, if you have the schema line in and you're using something like VS, this is how it works in VS Code. Other IDEs might work slightly differently, but if I hover over something, it'll tell me something about it. So if I hover over the word schema here, it says JSON schema URI for theme JSON. So that tells me, well, I'm going to add the URI or URL to where the schema exists. Version is the version of theme JSON to use, which right now is 2. Custom templates. There's a question, which IDE are you using? This is VS Code or Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. It is available on all the main operating systems. It's free. It's pretty standard for a lot of the developers that do WordPress development, at least. It's pretty great. So I've pretty much started using it exclusively, but there are lots of others too. PHP Storm is a commercial product that you can buy. Sublime isn't nesting as far as like being able to toggle. I have not tried this in Sublime, so that just may not be a feature out of the box, but I bet there's a plugin that would add it. Sublime and some other similar IDEs rely very heavily on plugins that can extend the functionality of the IDE. Even Visual Studio Code has that. So, all right. So the third thing is custom templates, which we'll be talking about next time. Settings. So now we're into the settings and we've got these settings that we've created. Color is the one that I think is the easiest to wrap your head around, because basically we're saying I want a color palette and these are the colors that I want to have within it. So, but let's go ahead and go down to hide a little bit more of this. I want to look at typography because this is where our font families are actually going to come in. So you can see that 2022 has 2 font families available to us. The one is a system font stack, and the other is Source Serif Pro. And then if we go into 2022, we're going to segue just a little bit to talk a little more about the fonts, since the questions came up about how you would load these fonts. So let me make this a little bigger so you can see the whole file name. So in 2022, there's an assets directory. That is just the way that the developers of this theme chose to structure their files. And within assets, you have fonts, images, and videos. In the fonts directory, we have these source serif for font files. And if I go into the functions.php file for this theme, we should see where those files have been enqueued. So let me see where that's happening. Yes, okay, so this smaller again so we can see a little bit more of the screen. So in functions.php, we have, we're enqueuing some scripts. So we've got this hook here that's being used. And then we're checking to see if the 2022 editor styles function exists. And then here's that function. So, and then add inline style, 2022 get font face styles. And then where is it actually being queued? This is down here, probably it. So we're saying the font face and all the information about it and where it exists. And this is pulling in that file, assets, fonts, and the name of the file. So that's basically where it is. So if you're curious about how it's done in 2022, this is it. I think that I've seen some less complex ways to pull fonts in than this, but it's one option to look at. All right. Yeah, one or two, I would say there was a question about how many will be in this series. We're kind of just going until we feel like we've covered the basics. It's a little bit on the fly. So I think we'll have one or two more that we'll do. And then we're kind of like going to take this all together and try to regroup a little bit and plan it out into a more consistent structure. And I wouldn't be surprised if we run something like this again to continue going through building your first block theme. Let's see. All right, so back to theme.json. So I wanted to just take a little bit of a look. So we've got our font families that have been created up here in the settings. And now if I scroll down to where styles are and expand that, then we can start to look for where those fonts are being used as the defaults. So let's see if we can find something that's higher up than blocks. So here we go. So if I collapse this all down so we only see this level, we can see that within styles, this theme.json file is setting styles for specific blocks, general color, general or specific elements, spacing, and typography. So the elements and the blocks are getting more specific, where color, spacing, and typography are all just added to the body. And that's basically the top of the cascade. And then more specific things could happen from there. So if I go into typography now, we can see that we're saying that the font family is going to choose that system font first. And then when we go up into elements and blocks, we'll probably see that it gets more specific, that maybe in certain cases that second font would be pulled in. The other ones that we have are line height and font size. So, and this is handy because that whole naming convention of naming things based on being a JavaScript developer versus being a front-end developer, like a CSS designer, kind of comes into play here. But if you hover over font family here, where it's got the JavaScript naming convention, you can see that the CSS naming convention is set, is there for you to like compare against. And the same thing for line height and font size. Okay, and then you'll see here that we have the variable and then the naming convention for that variable based on the way that the theme.json is being parsed out into the CSS custom properties. All right, so now if I go up into elements, then I can see I've got my H1 here, and now I'm pulling in that source serif pro just for the H1. So while it's going to, it'll first hit that system font, but the H1 is going to get overridden by this. And then you can override it further by making a different selection within your block settings. And in theme.json, what that looks like is up in here. Let's see if we have anything overriding the H1. I don't think so. So you could actually, within, let's say, if you had this quote block here, core quote, you could actually do it an element in the next level in, and then say H1, and then say a different font for an H1 in the quote block. So you can get quite specific with this nested system of setting defaults. And then from there, then within the design controls of the block that you add to your content, then you can even override that further. So lots of possibilities. So with that said, we have just a few minutes left in the hour. So this would be a good time to open up for questions, if you have any. Sally mentioned the site fullsiteediting.com. That is a good site. Carolina is the author of that site. She's also a contributor to the theme review team and very involved in the conversations around how the system is being developed. So it's a very good resource. I would highly recommend checking that out. Thank you, Alex. I very much enjoyed having you join us. And Christine says, that's what I'm studying, full site editing, very helpful. Yep. And full site editing is kind of like the collection of features that make all of these newest things work. So it includes block themes, it includes theme.json, it includes creating custom block templates that go into a block theme. And it includes all of the user interface features like the template editor, the site editor, and the global styles options in WordPress. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, so somebody mentioned this theme.json generator. There are a couple of these starting to come out. This one looks like it's coming along pretty well, where you can start to create your theme.json just by filling in a bunch of things. So I imagine this is going to get better over time. There's also a lot of, there is going to be some effort put into being able to like do all your configuration within WordPress and then export it as a theme.json. So I'm looking forward to a time where that's possible. You can already export your template files from in WordPress. So if you create all your templates using the template editor and the site editor, you can actually export it as all of the files that you need for your block theme, which is what we're going to be doing next. So let's see, for using the new style variations in Gutenberg 12.5.1, you will have to use theme.json too. I will be honest, I have not had a chance to look at the new style variations code yet, so I want to defer on that question. So I see a question. It seems like CSS could essentially wipe out what you code into theme.json, the theme.json file. So how can you set the priority? The priority is kind of like, it's just set for you based on what level it's being added at. So you just have to make sure that whatever CSS you're adding, if you even need it, because sometimes you may not, part of the goal of this theme.json system is to try to minimize the amount of CSS you have to write. So there is going to be some CSS that's required because the theme.json settings don't cover every possible thing. But over time, I think what we'll see is we create less CSS. So put your theme.json files on styles folder and boom. I'm not sure I understand that. So you can put your theme.json files into your child theme or into your parent theme. And then those are going to load. And then anything that doesn't get covered by what's in there and by what the block editor is creating, that's what you're going to be putting into your custom CSS or your style.css in a theme. All right. So this is still early days for this theme creation system. So I would say that over time, things are going to get better. We're going to start to see where some of the shortcomings are, that they can be shored up. These things will change and improve, and your feedback as you're getting accustomed to this and figuring out how to make it work into your workflows is valuable. Would love to hear if you have thoughts on where you find what things you find most challenging, what's working well for you, things like that. So all right, so it is 1:58 here where I am. We're right at the top of the hour, so I'm gonna wrap this up for today, but next time I hope that we will be starting to look at creating template files and template part files, and we're going to be using WordPress as our main development tool for that. Have a great day, everyone.